Welcome back to Playful Whimsies. Today I wanted to share with you one of my favorite books when I was a young girl, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle by Betty McDonald, pictures by Hilary Knight. Now, this is an awesome book. I do love this book from there are just so many different situations, and it's just kind of fun to listen to her ideas. So I just want to give all the credit to the author. She did an amazing job with this book. So you will see there are some beautiful pictures here by Hilary Knight. Very detailed, of course, not colored. And this book is originally copyrighted 1947. So at the moment, I am just borrowing it to share with you, lovely people. Hopefully my grandchildren are listening. So this is for Anne, Joan, Mari, Sally, Heidi, Darcy, Frankie, and Stevie, who are perfect angels and couldn't possibly have been the inspiration for any of these stories. But we are just going to start with Miss Piggle-Wiggle herself on page 9, if you are following along, which I highly, highly recommend. Go ahead and we will begin. Now, please bear in mind that I am dyslexic and sometimes my words get a little twisted. I'll do my best to read as smoothly as possible. Miss Piggle-Wiggle herself. I expect I might as well begin by telling you all about Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, so that whenever I mention her name, which I do very often in this book, you will not interrupt and ask, "Who is Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle? What does she look like? How big is she? How old is she? What color is her hair? Is her hair long? Does she wear high heels? Does she have any children? Is there a Mr. Piggle-Wiggle? Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle lives here in our town. She is very small and has a hump on her back, which when children ask her about the hump, she says, "Oh, that's a big lump of magic." Sometimes it turns me into a witch, other times into a dwarf or a fairy, and on very special occasions it makes me into a queen. The children are all very envious of the hump, because besides being magic, it is such a convenient, fastening place for wings. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle has brown sparkly eyes and brown hair which she keeps very long, almost to her knees, so that children can comb it. She usually wears it on top of her head in a knot, unless someone has been combing it, and then she has braids or long wet curls, or long hair just hanging and with a jeweled crown or flowers on top. One day I saw her digging in her garden wearing the jeweled crown, and with her hair bellowing down her back. She waved gaily and said, "I promised Betsy is one of her children friends, that I would not touch this hair until she came home from school." And then she went on with her digging. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's skin is a goldy brown, and she has a warm, spicy, sugary cookie smell that is very comforting to children who are sad about something. Her clothes are all brown and never look crisp and pressed, because they are used for dress-up. She wears felt hats, which children poke and twist into witches' and pirates' hats, and she does not mind at all. Sunday morning she takes one of the hats off the closet shelf, gives it a few good thumps, pulls it down firmly down and there is Odin, the book cat. All right. Sunday morning, she takes one of the hats off the closet shelf, gives it a few thumps, pulls it firmly down fore and aft, and wears it to church. She wears very high heels all the time, and is glad to let the little girls borrow her shoes. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle has no family at all. She says that her husband, Mr. Piggle-Wiggle, was a pirate, and after he buried all of his treasure in the backyard, he died. She just has herself and Wag, her dog, and Lightfoot, her cat. The most remarkable thing about Miss Piggle-Wiggle is her house, which is upside down. It is a little brown house, and sitting up there in its tangly garden, it looks like a small brown puppy lying on its back with its feet in the air. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle says that when she was a little girl, she used to lie in bed and gaze up at the ceiling and wonder what it would be like if the house were upside down. And so when she grew up and built her own house, she had it built upside down, just to see. The bathroom, the kitchen, the staircase are all right side up. They are more convenient that way. You can easily see that you cannot cook on an upside down stove, or wash dishes in an upside down sink, or walk up upside down stairs. Although, children, let me tell you, when I was young, we used to take a mirror and walk around and pretend like we were living upside down. Looking at a big mirror, we would be walking on the wall, and it was fun. In the living room of her house, it is a large chandelier, and instead of being on the ceiling, it is on the floor. Of course, it is really on the ceiling, but the ceiling is the floor, and so it is on the floor, and the children turn on the lights and then squat around it, pretending it is a campfire. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle says that her chandelier is the only one in town which is put to any real use. Her bedrooms all have slidey boards in them because if you will look up at your attic ceiling, you will see that a slanty ceiling, when turned upside down, makes a fine slidey board. Also, the wall lights are very close to the floor and handy for the small children. Excuse me. Tea. For the first 5 or 10 years after the house was built, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle climbed in and out of her rooms over the high doorways, but now she has little steps, which are just the thing to practice jumping. She gives the children chalk so they can mark on the rug how far they jump. Nobody knows how old Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle is. She says she doesn't know herself. She says, "What difference does it make how old I am, when I shall never grow any bigger?" Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's dog, Wag, has puppies every once in a while, so she keeps a long list of names of children who want them on the blackboard in her kitchen. For Lightfoot, the cat's kitten, she has a long waiting list on the blackboard in the dining room. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's backyard is full of big holes where small boys dig for Mr. Piggle-Wiggle's buried treasures, and her front yard is full of flowers, which the little girls pick, jam into vases, and place about her living room or carry to their teachers. Every child in town is a friend of Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's, but she knows very few of their parents. She says grown-ups make her nervous. I can very much understand this. For the first years for the first year after she built her house, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle lived there all by herself except for Wag and Lightfoot, and she was very lonely. Then one dark, rainy afternoon, when she was baking sugar cookies and thinking about how much fun it would be if she knew someone besides Wag and Lightfoot to invite for tea, she happened to look out of her window, and there, coming up the street in the pouring rain, dragging a big suitcase and bawling, was a little girl. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle wiped the flour off her hands and hurried right out into the rain and invited the little girl in for tea. The little girl's name was Mary Lou Robinson, and she was 8 years old and quite fat, and she was running away from home. She told Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle all this after she had drunk 3 cups of cambric tea and eaten 7 sugar cookies. She said, "I'm running away from home because I have to wash dishes. All I do is wash dishes. I am just a servant. Dishes, dishes, dishes. Wash, dry, put away. That's all I do. My mother doesn't love me at all. She isn't my real mother anyway. She probably got me out of an orphanage just to wash her dishes." Mary Lou began to cry again, so that the 8th sugary cookie got quite soggy before she finished it. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "Isn't she your real mother?" Mary Lou said, "She says she is, but no real mother would make you wash dishes. Wash dishes. Wash dishes." "Now that's a funny thing," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "I mean your hating to wash dishes so much. Because, you see, I like to wash dishes. In fact, I enjoy washing dishes so much that a cause of great sorrow to me is the fact that the only dishes I must wash are for Wag, Lightfoot, and me. 3 or 4 dishes a meal, that is all. When I wash dishes, Mary Lou, I pretend that I am a beautiful princess with long, golden, curly hair." Mary Lou's hair was jet black and braided in 2 stiff little pigtails, and an apple blossom skin, and forget-me-not blue eyes. I have been captured by a wicked witch, and my only chance to get free is to wash every single dish and have the whole kitchen sparkly clean before the clock strikes. For when the clock strikes, the witch will come down and inspect to see if there is a crumb anywhere, if there are pots and pans that have been put away wet, if the silverware has been thrown in the drawer, or if the sink has not been scrubbed out. The witch will have me in her powers for another year." Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle looked at the clock and jumped up. "It is 10 minutes to 4, Princess, and we have so much to do. Hurry, hurry, hurry!" Mary Lou also jumped up and began carrying the tea things to the sink, and Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle whisked them in and out of the dishwater, and Mary Lou dried them, and Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle hurried as fast as she could and put the cookie things away, and every once in a while she would stop and say, "Hark, Princess, do you hear the thump of the witch's gnarly cane?" Then Mary Lou, her braids bobbing up and down with excitement, would say, "I hear it! Princess, it is coming closer and closer." Soon the kitchen sparkled. The dishes were washed and dried and put away, and every crumb had been swept off the floor. Mary Lou even curled Lightfoot's tail neatly around her legs and smoothed Wag's fur. Just before the clock struck, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said to Mary Lou, "Princess, I must leave you now, but show the witch your work, and oh, I do hope you will be freed." Then she went upstairs, and pretty soon down the stairs came a terrible old hag with a long black dress, a tall black hat, and a big, gnarly black cane. Mary Lou was very scared until she saw the sparkly eyes of Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle under the black hat. She showed the witch the kitchen, and the witch took out the cookie pans and carried them over to the light to see if they were clean and dry. She got down on her knees, squeaking like a rusty gate, to see if Mary Lou had swept under the stove. She felt inside the teacups to see if there was sugar in the bottoms, and she put on her glasses to examine the sink. But she could not find anything wrong, so she handed Mary Lou the key to the kitchen door and screeched out, "You are free, princess, but I will get you again, never fear." The witch clumped back up the stairs, and in a minute down came Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "Well," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, "do you see why I like to wash dishes?" Mary Lou said, "Oh, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, that was the most fun I'd ever had." Miss Piggle-Wiggle said, "Of course, you can have more fun than I can, because you have so many more dishes to wash. If only I had more dishes to wash and could take longer, I would be a princess with curly, yellow, long hair, apple blossom skin, and blue eyes, and a beautiful voice, and I would sing sad songs over the dishpan. Also, if I had more dishes, I would have the witch ride through the night on a broomstick, and I would creep out on the back porch to see if she was coming. I could hear her land with a thump on the roof, and I would slip upstairs to see if she was going to slide down the chimney or thump downstairs. Oh, there would be ever so many exciting things to pretend if only I had more dishes." After a while it stopped raining and the sun came out, and Mary Lou took her suitcase and went home. That night her mother, it really was her mother, of course, almost fainted when she came out to the kitchen exactly 27 minutes after dinner, and Mary Lou was sweeping the floor, and all the dishes were washed and dried and put away, and everything was immaculate. Mrs. Robinson rushed in and called Mary Lou's father, and he came out to the kitchen and pretended to fall over on the floor with surprise. And then he said to Mary Lou's mother, "I like your new maid, madam. In fact, she's so much better than Telly Slopwash, who used to be here, that I think we should invite her to the moving pictures show some early evening." Then Mary Lou told them all about Miss Piggle-Wiggle, and Mary Lou's mother said, "Oh yes, I remember seeing that odd little house. She sounds like a charming friend, and if you are certain that she invited you, you may go over there after school tomorrow." And that, my dear friends, is where we are going to leave for today. I hope you have enjoyed these few pages of Miss Piggle-Wiggle, and we will learn more about Miss Piggle-Wiggle and her house and the things that she does tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed.